Hello. Thank you. Hi, Dominic. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, all right, is the next assignment is the West, and it's a really long one. However, because I have not yet put it up, I actually just finished it. Because I've not yet put it up, I'm gonna go ahead and extend the due date.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, I'll extend it for sure. That's the least I can do for being late and posting it. And it's a doozy. It's long. It's pertinent to the second test. But of course, you're just choosing one for your assignment to work on. But yeah, I gotta say it's a bit long. It's like 24, 26 pages. All right. And so let me put this up and kind of cover the gist here. All right. So I start off with this map, right? As you see there in the middle, that's the Louisiana Purchase that we bought from Napoleon in 1803, and all the future states that entails. And then you look over at Texas, and we are going to not we, right? It's American citizens, but not the U.S. government. They're acting independent of the U.S. government, but American citizens are going to take Texas in 1836, and then in 1845, we were going to move to annex it as a state. So from 36 to 45, those 9 years, it was the famous Lone Star Republic on its own. And then you see the Mexican Cession there. That is what we took from 1846 to 1848 when we fought the Mexican army and defeated them and took that land. And then a few years later, you see the Gadsden Purchase to finish off the bottom of Arizona and a little corner of New Mexico to secure the line, the national boundary line that we have today, in line with the Rio Grande. Okay. And then also the Oregon Country. I never spent enough time on the Oregon Country. Although the way that it was taken was a bit anticlimactic. We'll get to that. But notice, right, it's not just Oregon today. It's actually that line should go up into Canada, into British Columbia. It was British Columbia, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and little pieces of Wyoming and Montana, all part of that large territory. All right, so we'll get into that as well. So on this one, right, number one, I feel like I could go over a little bit more quickly because it's redundant, right? And that is as the point I've already made, is that because Americans leaders made a conservative consensus not to address the real radical issues, no type of land redistribution. They wouldn't touch slavery. They allowed the states to decide and kick that can down the road. They also wouldn't touch the Native Americans and the idea of universal, at least male suffrage at that time. That was being embraced down in Latin America. And so because of that, because they kicked those cans and issues down the road, for the time being, right, they had a sense of cohesion. And so then I go into Hamilton's system, right? And whatever you think, as far as, if you're laissez-faire capitalist, or if you're government intervention, you can make the argument that in Hamilton's system, it yielded some results. So I'm just showing how radical and how much more broad the spectrum was in Latin America between the left and the right. And so hence it's going to get them in immediate civil wars and coups, etc. So we'll get back to that with Mexico. But Hamilton, right, with his Federalist Party, he got loans internationally. He got loans from the wealthy. He also had bond certificates that the wealthy bought and expected that money back with interest. And he took his sweet time in paying them back. He also issued taxes, which was ironic, right? Because he is a hand-picked guy in the cabinet. And we said, no taxation without representation. But he taxed us without having been elected by us. And matter of fact, to add to the irony, he put a tax on tea, tobacco, alcohol, whiskey, etc. what he called luxury or sinful goods. And then what he did, right, is he subsidized industries. If you could convince him and the federal government that what you did was what you're doing, what you're manufacturing is going to be good for the whole country and helping us to become self-sufficient and providing all our own goods, then they would meet you halfway with the costs and with the capital, etc. And so they subsidized lots of different growing industries. The first industry, right, was argumentatively the textiles with Samuel Slater and others in Connecticut and the New England states using water power. And it didn't take long for them to go on to steam power, and which was you didn't have to go to a source of water. It was more efficient. And then the use of the steamboat. And then also, right, with infrastructure, he wanted to subsidize toll roads. And then after toll roads in the 1820s, the fad was the canal. And famously in 1825, the Erie Canal, right? It connected the Northwest, the Ohio Valley, with the Northeast. And it was very, very commercially important. And so we kind of had a commercial revolution. New York at that time is going to really open up to the global market as a center of trade. And yeah, and then you also had the birth of interchangeable parts, and that it will be the beginning of assembly line production. And of course, it's going to put the artisans or the skilled workers out of work. There are always casualties to progress, but it did well for the country as a whole. The manufacturing of different goods. So he's going to do all that. The states are going to pay for more than he does with the federal government when it comes to infrastructure and tying markets to the production and etc. So yeah, you have all that, and then you have the Supreme Court, and they made a couple big decisions: Fletcher versus Peck, Dartmouth, Gibbons versus Ogden, and they just under a guy named John Marshall, who was a conservative pro-Hamilton Supreme Court justice and the chief one. He wanted to make sure that America was business friendly. And so right by the time of the Civil War, I think I have here somewhere that there was $500 million of European investments into our economy in one part or another of our economy prior to the Civil War. So we just kind of take off. Our population triples, and then we also grow in territory, right? At the end of the War of 1812, we're going to secure the Ohio Valley. I mean, we claim that from the time of our Confederation, our failed first government in the 1780s. But now we're really they're becoming states, and they're being heavily planted with settlers coming from all regions on the East Coast. And then you also have the Yazoo area of Alabama and Mississippi that's going to open up, and it has very black, fertile, nitrogen-rich soil. And so you're going to get a class of, they call them parvenus, like Beverly Hillbillies, guys that go from rags to riches, moving down into the Mississippi and Alabama area and purchasing slaves. And then once again, right, in 1808, the slave trade ended. And yes, there was piracy. And yes, there was natural increase with the slaves. But nevertheless, right, Maryland and Virginia, right about that time, around 1820, their tobacco industry plummeted. And so many slaves were sold down into the Deep South for these parvenus to use. And with a glut of them, the price became more affordable as well. So it was just a marriage made in hell for the slaves going down near Georgia, but it worked for these parvenus, these nouveau riche guys down in the Deep South. Later on, they're going to be known as the fire eaters politically, because they won't bend at all on the slavery issue. So at any rate, there's Hamilton and there's the Erie Canal. And let's see here. We had a couple Seminole Wars, the Creek in particular, because of the Fort Mims massacre during the War of 1812. really incurred the wrath of the U.S. Army. And of course, we're going to take land from them as we do so. Okay. And then that's not to mention when you get into the 1830s, you get into the Trails of Tears, right, with the 5 civilized tribes, and the states refused to acknowledge the federal treaties, and then they declared eminent domain, whereby the tribes were supposed to sell their land back to the state legislator and move westwardly to Indian country, which was Arkansas and Oklahoma at that time. And the Supreme Court defended them, but then Andrew Jackson defied the Supreme Court, and he brought his army in. It was mainly the Cherokee who won that case. He brings his army in, and he cites the 1821 McIntosh case, whereby the government stated that the Native Americans are the ward of the state. And right, like a ward of the state is like orphan children, right? Like they're completely dependent upon the federal government. It's not a good status to have compared to a citizen. So he cited that, right? And he said it was for their own protection that they'd be forcefully removed from the Carolinas and Georgia and moved to Oklahoma and Arkansas. Matter of fact, the leader, his last name was Ross. Oh gosh, at any rate, the leader of the Cherokee, he was murdered by his own tribesmen for signing the okay to this Trail of Tears. It's just a really sad story. But this is the time of Andrew Jackson, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the 1830s. So now Mexico, let's see here. I went too far, sorry. So a contrast with Mexico. So Agustin de Iturbide declares himself the emperor in 1821. Well, he serves 3 years and he's overthrown. Then they have a liberal republic constitution modeled after ours in 1824, and Guadalupe Victoria serves a complete term from 24 to 28 as the first president of the republic. But after that, it went downhill. The next election winner was Gomez Pedraza. He was overthrown. Then Vicente Guerrero. He was not only overthrown, but he was executed by Anastasio Bustamante's men. Then Bustamante was overthrown by Valentin Gomez Farias. And then there was, they called a holy revolution by Santa Anna, overthrowing Gomez Farias. And then Santa Anna will be overthrown as well. So take a look at this. I don't mean to make light of it. It's just crazy. Let's see here. In the Republic's first 33 years, right? 49 administrations came and went. 49 administrations in only 33 years. So that is very, very much political instability, right? And so what are we doing? We're setting the stage, right, for the U.S. being able to be strong enough to bully the far west from Mexico, and Mexico being vulnerable. So the main site I use on Mexico's 19th century works is David Wasserman, and it's Everyday Life in 19th Century Mexico. And it's a really good book. It's just right to the point. All right, and so at any rate, then on to the next one. The basic narrative of Western expansion. Now, this one I want to improve because it's more informative than it is argumentative. Number 2, but I feel like for the sake of the test, and just for the sake of just kind of the student learning outcomes and what you're supposed to learn in the class, how do I not deal with westward expansion, right? So at any rate, there's not much of an argument to it, but it starts off supposedly, right, as fur trading monopolies. The most famous was the Hudson Bay Company, right? And then you had John Jacob Astor with his company, and he established Astoria there in Oregon. And you have lots of other companies that came to challenge the domination of the Hudson Bay Company in the West, in the Northwest, okay? And so from there, right, you had a guy named Robert Stewart, and during the War of 1812, Robert Stewart basically crosses the what will later become the Oregon Trail. Uh, and he is paid to tell his story about their travails that they went through, and it was dramatic. I mean, not to be gross, but they supposedly had to drink their own urine at one time. They were attacked by bears. All the dramatic stuff that you see in Hollywood with this, like the Revenant type movies, right? So at any rate, it was pretty severe at the time of like 1814 when he did it. But of course, these trails, right, had first been created by Native Americans without exception. And so you had these trails. You had by 1814, you had the Oregon Trail um, traveled and then publicized in the life of Robert Stewart. And then in the 1820s, you had the other two. You had the Santa Fe Trail, and with the Santa Fe Trail, there was a great trade, a lot of money to be had for the famous mountain men. And the mountain men, right? They became independent kind of entrepreneurs, and they went and trapped their own beaver, and they would go to the famous rendezvous. They had them in Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, New Mexico, and you would usually it was in the spring, and they would meet and they'd have like a flea market, and they would have like a competition in athletics and have like a big festival that was known as the rendezvous. But at any rate, from there, right, they would learn the tricks of the trade with these trails from Native Americans. So the Santa Fe Trail went down through the South. I should have a picture here somewhere of the trails. Let's see here. Yeah, right there. Although no, I just have the Oregon and the Mormon Trail or the California Trail. Mormon and California are synonymous. Uh, oh, that was silly of me. I don't know why I don't have the Santa Fe Trail also. But the Santa Fe Trail, right? It went from Missouri, like the other two, down into New Mexico, and then from New Mexico to the Sierra Nevada, it was the old Spanish Trail, as it was called. So you took the Santa Fe to the Spanish, and then you had these gaps, right, that were discovered. So in the Sierra Nevada, it was named after a guy named Wilson. So it's known as the Wilson Gap in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So now when you're taking your Conestoga wagon, etc., you're able to do that. But in the 1820s, like I said, they kind of popularized these two other routes. Okay, after the Oregon.
Talking,
Yeah.
you're talking gaps like they just stopped making.
Yes. Yes. You know what? I've never seen it, and because I've driven, just 80 through the Sierra Nevada, but evidently it's like a 2.5 mile gap. Yeah. And the one in the Rockies is even broader than that.
And they just had to figure out how to get around it themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so, but what they would do though, right, is at this is now in the end of the 1820s, the mountain men became like kind of like celebrities. And so what they would do is they would hire their services, and people, oftentimes it was only the wealthy who could afford it. They would pay them handsomely to serve as scouts and show them,
Navigate.
yeah, to
And they've
navigate.
already done it before, I'm sure. So they,
Exactly. So you have Jim Bridger, you have Kit Carson, you have Jedediah Smith, you have Tom Fitzpatrick. These guys were just big names at that time. And yeah, so at any rate, they had biographies written of them, etc. And so and then in the 1840s, right? Because 1830s, I haven't read much as far as um, big instrumental changes in the overland trails. Although, of course, there were a handful that traveled during that decade. But in 1843, for instance, right, this was followed up by a couple named the Whitmans, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, and they were Methodist missionaries, and they went into Oregon, and they inadvertently brought smallpox with them, and the Cayuse natives killed them. They massacred them. And so news gets back, right? and there's like this big uproar that they can't have died in vain. That missionaries need to come to Oregon and save the souls of the Native Americans, etc. Right? And
So
then
they built a
Romanists,
mission on the, so they built a mission on the trail and left it there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they probably did. I haven't read of that, but
No,
yeah.
I just see Whitman's mission on this map here.
Oh, all right.
Like this was dedicated after them, or I guess I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sadly, I did not even notice that. But notice where it says the Willamette Valley.
Hmm.
That's where the Americans were centered. That's where the Americans traveled to, was the Willamette Valley. Absolutely. And so then you had about the same time, you had the famous story of the Blackfeet and the Nez Perce bringing their chiefs all the way to St. Louis and telling them that they were interested in the white man's great black book, the Bible. And so this just took the country, the Christians by storm. So it was mainly the Baptist and the Methodist. And in 1843, for the first time, you have upwards of 10,000 travel across the Oregon Trail, and that was unheard of until 1843. So supposedly that was a big pivotal year. So yeah, they came in mass, and then also right, one of the first groups to settle in the Willamette Valley. It was, even though it was to be agreed that there was joint occupation by this time, the British governor still kind of ran things, and his name was McLaughlin, Dr. McLaughlin. And so at any rate, he has this group come in, and they were called the Spalding Group, right? Like that Spalding brand of like volleyballs, etc. So the Whitmans and the Spaldings came in, and what he saw was that they brought economic. The word for that day was enterprise. They started mills and other kind of novel things economically, and they also seemed to be harmless. And so McLaughlin makes a decision. You know what? Americans could settle here in the Willamette Valley as long as they don't stir any trouble. They're fine, and that's where they're going to accrue because of the good reputation of the Whitmans and Spaldings. Um, so at any rate, something similar is going to happen in Mexican California. The first couple guys that went in, a guy by the last name of Wilson, and then Jedediah Smith, they really provoked the fear of the Mexican government. It was Governor Echeandia and then Governor Figueroa were the two governors of California, Mexican California, when these two came in, and they were very, very reticent of them. However, right, coming through that gap, that Wilson Gap, came the Bidwells and the Bartlesons, the Bidwell-Bartleson group. And again, the same reputation. They had a reputation for economic enterprise and for basically being harmless. Many of them came as families with children. And so the comandante, at first, it was a guy named Arguello. And then after that, it was Vallejo, that Vallejo is named after. They both said that they like these people and they're enterprising. And so they put Johann von Suter, a Swiss businessman who was in really well with Governor Castro, to be kind of their policeman there where that gap is in the Sierra Nevada, where what we know as Sutter's Mill. So at any rate, when they came in, right, they were first seen as harmless, and so they allowed more to come in after that. But of course, after that, you had guys that had a bad reputation. I don't remember the specifics, but there was a guy named Lucas Graham, spelled like the graham cracker. He stirred a lot of trouble and was a source of a lot of drama in Mexican California. You had Ezekiel Merritt, who's going to help lead the Bear Flag Revolt during the Mexican-American War, and these others, right? And it also kind of makes sense that they're coming in the 1830s and early 1840s because it's the Jacksonian period over on the East Coast. And they're taking land from the Cherokee and the other tribes. Jacksonian time period, right? who I think does a really good job on that time period is Richard Hofstadter, American Political Tradition. It's a really good book, and it's a really good chapter on Jackson and his era. But what he focuses on more than politics is economics. And he says that Jackson, right, they ran these log cabin campaigns, whereby they would act like I am no better than anybody else. I'll use improper grammar because I wasn't educated formally very well. I'm from a log cabin, etc. Right, but I become a self-made man, and that's what they were all about in the Jacksonian period. He has a famous expression. He said the average American was an expectant capitalist, right? He was a poor frontiersman who didn't want anybody to put on airs like they were better than him, and he was expecting to become successful, right? And he wanted no impediments in his way. And so, really, in a way, there was kind of an element of populism going on, right? And to me, populism is the ugly side of democracy. It's when the elected leaders they push the negative buttons in their constituents, their ambition and their greed, their prejudice against other groups, etc. Right? And they encourage those negative emotions and thoughts and sentiments in becoming elected and their leader. And then, of course, when they're elected, they ingratiate them. So, of course, there was an anti-intellectual bent in this generation. There was an anti-bent toward businessmen and bankers and people from cities. And there was an anti-foreigner kind of xenophobia that they encouraged as well. And with it, right, they were, in their rhetoric at least, they were laissez-faire. They were government, let the economy be, right? Government, don't tread on me. Let me do my thing. Let me chase after the American dream with little taxes or any other kind of legal encumbrances to what I want. Okay, so they're coming in there, and there's also a guy named Richard Henry Dana, D-A-N-A, and he writes a famous book called 2 Years at the Mast. He traveled around the world, and he spent time in Mexico, California, and it's something else, right? Because he depicts Mexico, California as like beautiful and idyllic, but at the same time, right, he's condescending. And he says in one of his famous expressions, he says, just think what this state could be in the hands of an enterprising people. Because he said that the Mexican and Spaniards there were indolent, right? They were lazy, they were backward, etc. And so, yeah, so Dana's book was read by many. You also had a guy named Thomas Hart Benton, and Benton was on the Foreign Committee of the Senate, and he pushed really hard to help subsidize the overland trails. Okay, and so before you know it, right, they started off by saying, okay, well, according to the Fifth Amendment, right, Americans' life, liberty, and property are to be protected by the federal government. So they said we're gonna put forts every 50 to 100 miles and put some soldiers there to protect them as they're going through Native American, especially territory, right? And then they began offering supplies, free maps, grain, and things to eat, etc. And even help with directions along the Oregon Trail, especially in the 1840s. It all started flowering. And so you had that going on. And then Thomas Hart Benton had a son-in-law named John C. Fremont. And Fremont, right, he was a part of the topographical crew. That was the same name of the crew that Lewis and Clark had. That technically you are to go and check out the flora and fauna, right, the animal and plant life, the geography and topography, etc. But you're wearing a military uniform. So at any rate, John C. Fremont came, and supposedly the first time he really was chased by Native Americans going in through the Sierra foothills. And oh gosh, I used to remember the name of the tribe. But at any rate, the Shoshone natives. So at any rate, they chase him into the Sacramento Valley, and he has paperwork that states right what he was to do. He had scientific equipment with him. They said, okay, that's fine. But the problem is, right, is he comes back 2 more times. And the other 2 times, he does not have the paperwork. He does not stick to the same story. And so it gets much more controversial and unnerving for the Mexican authorities. So they tell him to leave by the way by which he came. And he promised and he lied. Then he went up on some famous hill, and they surrounded it with the Mexican military. Then he surrendered, said he didn't want to fight, but he had to head northward. So he heads northward up into Oregon Territory, and we know now that he met with Archibald Gillespie, and Archibald Gillespie was a spy for the U.S. government, and so he bid his time for the Mexican-American War to begin, so he could drop right back into with his soldiers, right back into Mexican California, and participate in the Bear Flag Revolt. So at any rate, you have all that going on, all right. And then the loss of Texas. So what I say is, right, is Alexis de Tocqueville, he came into America as a French aristocrat, and he was just absolutely, in some ways, enamored. In some ways, it was a bit condescending, like it was like being in a zoo looking at wild animals. But he was just very, I don't know the proper adjective, but it just really caught his attention the way Americans behaved and their culture and their ways. So at any rate, he wrote what became a classic, and it's called Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. So at any rate, he writes in it, and he kind of adheres to American exceptionalism. He says that the New England colonies started a very unique kind of libertarian and democratic tradition and so forth. And you could find evidence to go against that, as I gave you in an earlier assignment on revisionist data on the Puritans. But, so some of the generalizations he made don't stand well today. But these right here, right? I thought these kind of fit the gentleman who fought at the Alamo fairly well. That with a general equality of minimal education, many Americans in his generation shared prejudices and ideas concerning religion, history, science, and government. That a so-called democratic culture rendered Americans desirous of being equal with their peers in power and honor, even if that entailed lowering the powerful to their level. That in the western and southern frontier regions, no old aristocratic class of influential surnames prevailed. So everyone was kind of on equal footing as like a, anonymous and trying to make it rich down in Texas. And regarding the pursuit of the American dream, especially in the frontier regions, de Tocqueville noted, I know of no country, indeed, where the love of money has taken stronger hold. He has a funny quote, right, where he says, an American will begin building a log cabin, and before the roof is finished, he decides to abandon it and move to better land further west. And, so that idea, right, that Americans were just almost in a frenzy trying to chase after that ever elusive American dream. Okay. And Richard Hofstadter says, yes, they were against people putting on airs, especially people that were born into money, right? But at the same time, he says, they did show deference to one class of people. The ideal frontier society, as Frederick Jackson Turner has remarked, was the self-made man, right? As long as you started off poor, you had their adulation, okay? But you also had their envy. So this deference to self-made men.
Sounds like I need to go back in time a little
bit. Yeah, are you a self-made man?
I am.
Good. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Yeah,
projects in New York.
I'm sorry?
Projects in New York.
All right. No, honestly, that is enviable. That's incredible. That's great. Yeah, I got to see I drove through Brooklyn and where else? And then I ended up crossing the Jersey side, but I went to Ellis Island and those
That's
islands.
where my wife is, and we don't have anybody else on this chat, so I don't mind. My wife is from Mexico, and when we her first trip, I don't know how many, 5 years, 6 years ago, and she wanted to see the big lady, the
Yeah,
Statue of
yeah.
Liberty. That was the thing, you know.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, it was just as wonderful as I had anticipated. I loved it. Loved it.
It's pretty surreal
It is. It
to
is.
know how much happened on that ground.
That's right. That's right. And you know what's funny to me is you never know what's gonna like move you, right? Um, I of course I had a smile on my face the entire time of being there at the Statue of Liberty. Um, but when I was at the station, inside that empty station, I could just I could just imagine like
Yeah,
all those Gilded Age and early 1900 immigrants just flooded in there.
no
Like
idea,
that's where it really hit me was inside that station.
no idea what they were doing or where they were going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just incredible. I didn't want to leave. I just sat there just dazed. It was
Taking it in. Yep.
taking it in exactly. So at any rate, right? You see here he says this deference to self-made men was palatable, right? They could swallow showing deference to some men only so far as the poor white men believed there was a chance to join their rank, right? So okay, yeah, I'm happy for you, Dominic, but I'm not truly sincerely happy unless I believe I'm going to become a self-made man too, right? Yeah. So at any rate, so to me, right, it fits perfectly with the narrative of what happened in Texas. Okay. So going down to that. I mean, look at this. The average homestead that you could obtain in the Ohio Valley was 160 acres. Okay. Every family was given, and they were on the hectares of land instead of acres. They were on the metric system, but it ended up being this right here 4,438 acres to each family. That is extremely extravagantly generous, right?
And who gave this?
This was the Mexican government gave power to the impresario. First, it was Moses Austin, and then he passed away, and then the power was given to his son Stephen Austin to serve as impresario, as like a governor of Eastern Texas, of this kind of gringo colony. And of course, they were subject to Mexican law and the Mexican Constitution, but they were already, you could make the argument, semi-autonomous as their own unique, because at that time, right, it was Coahuila and Texas were together as one state. So yeah, it was Coahuila y Tejas was the name of the United State, both of them. And the capital was in Saltillo, Coahuila. So they have to travel down to Saltillo for their political meetings and passing laws and all that. So at any rate, right, at first they received 300 settlers. All right. Supposedly the first 300 did as asked. They were to assimilate. They were to become Roman Catholic. They were to conduct all their businesses in the Spanish language, and they were to abide by Mexican law. Okay. However,
So
right?
they're 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 living both ways right now. By Mexican law and U.S. Is it Mexican and U.S. jurisdiction?
No, I mean, yes and no. They're under the jurisdiction where an American is in charge of executing the laws, but the laws actually being written were written in Mexico
Passed down by
City, in
Mexico.
Saltillo. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Where does that property stand? The line at this time,
Oh gosh.
you know, Or do
I
you have any?
don't. I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to figure out when everything started
Sure.
trickling, it's shrinking. Mexico started. When did we buy you? When did when was California bought? When did it, like, what was the effects?
Sure.
I'll,
No,
I'll
I think a lot of them were by the southeastern LBJ River. That's where a lot of them supposedly they were camped in large numbers. But right, but southwestern Texas, you have San Antonio, and they had a city council in San Antonio. So I don't
all
know if
right.
it was diagonal or what. The line. I'm sorry that I can't tell you.
I went to one of the museums in San Antonio. We also went over to Juarez to the one of the museums to see how the the population crossed back and forth way back. They
Sure.
had to be deloused coming into the United States, and what they went through. That was pretty intense.
Yeah, it was. And they were doing that as late as the 1950s with the Bracero program, right?
Yeah.
With the Mexican migrants working for us in the fields during World War II.
Yep.
And it lasted almost about 10 years after the war was over, into the mid 50s. And yeah, they deloused them. And I've seen video coverage of some of that stuff myself. It's very degrading. Yeah. But yeah, yeah, when I was in school, I did a semester in Saltillo, Coahuila, and I loved it. Um, I
Where
loved
is
it.
that? Where is that located at?
That's beneath Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, it's beneath Texas. Yeah, and it's like in the northwestern part of Coahuila, and Saltillo, I believe, is the capital actually still. Yeah, yeah. And so at any rate, they get all this land. And now, granted, right? Uh, what one thing that the Mexican government did not do is they didn't cut a deal with the Native Americans. So one tribe in particular were known as the Karankawa tribe, and they were, by almost all accounts, pretty fearsome. And so, they didn't give their okay for the gringos to come in there, and so they attacked, and there were battles and fought, etc. And so, in some of these cases, right, the settlers are kind of fighting on their own, or they're joining forces informally, not with an actual militia or army. And then, in addition to that, they faced famine for the first 3 years. It was tough, where they were trying to get their foodstuffs to grow, and in the meantime, they were reliant upon hunting, and they were trying to hunt deer, etc., to feed off of. So I only say that because some of them mention that in the future, saying, "Well, we don't need Mexico telling us what to do. We've been fighting and the natives and fighting hunger on our own without any outside help, etc." So you have racism, you have prejudice for sure. You have this Jacksonian era culture, right? That just prizes above all things the American dream and the poor man becoming a self-made man. And you have a sense of libertarianism, where they don't want the government to tax them or to impede upon their quest toward wealth in any way. And then you have this sense of entitlement, that they're fighting against hardships on their own. But never mind the fact that they received over 4,000 acres of free land, right? You'd think they'd stay grateful for that for a while. So I've actually have not read of these revolts right here. All it like in basic Chicano history books, it just briefly mentions them and mentions that they were shot down. The Fredonian Revolt and the Turtle Bayou resolutions. So on those two occasions, right, the Norte Americanos, the Anglo Americans, tried to break free by force and gain their independence. And what's interesting too, as far as great man history, is Stephen Austin. Stephen Austin himself fought against them. Stephen Austin also sent letters to Saltillo and to Mexico City, complaining that he needed more Mexican soldiers to enforce the laws because there were just too many of them and they were too defiant. Okay. And so at any rate, you have Mier y Teran. Where's Mier? There he is right here. This guy, right, comes up on an expedition and he's doing a formal inquiry into this East Texas colony, right? And he has nothing but bad news. He said that the Norte Americanos are haughty, they're arrogant, they're defiant, they're not willing to pay their taxes. They have not learned Spanish, have not been baptized as Roman Catholic, and also they were smuggling in slaves. And Mexico was ahead of us, right? By this time, slavery was outlawed in Mexico. And so that was clearly a violation of Mexican law.
Do you think that the North Americans were acting like this because they wanted to show that they're superior, because they didn't want to be messed with, or because they thought that they were?
Yeah, honestly, I think it was both. Absolutely. Like, where do I have that? Right here. I have
I mean, I guess it goes with history, everything that I've been learning from you, that we, as a whole, white male Americans have been gradually increasing our strengths, and everyone else has been set by the wayside.
Yeah. I have no defense to that. There's just too much evidence for it supporting it. And that's conflict history, but there just is. There's just so much data to support conflict history. There really is. And you see, whether you agree with it or not, you can see why there's been like a woke movement, and like the kind of WASP male as seen as the privileged person, demographic. Yeah.
I mean, history proves it.
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. So see, such requirements were likely either perceived as impediments or arrogantly ignored as irrelevant to the Anglo settlers' quest for wealth. It's also fairly safe to infer that once Anglo Americans in Mexican Texas sensed their own strength in numbers, they felt confident to defy Mexican expectations without consequences. So to me, I think it's all those. Yeah. But yeah, just the writings of the Americans that came into Mexican California alone at this time just show you the absolute just arrogance and disdain. I don't know why, right? Because we hadn't had a major conflict with Mexico yet, or even with Spain for that matter. But just this level of disdain. I have a book on California, and I have the quote. Actually, I think it'll be down in a further number, the next number. But my goodness, the stuff they say. Matter of fact, if you'll indulge me, let me go down to the next number. Okay. I mean, look at some of this stuff. For example, Mexico's first ambassador, after engaging in diplomacy with American politicians in 1822, reported that their haughtiness does not permit them to look upon us as equals. Even the Northern Cosmopolitan New York Herald depicted the Mexican people as imbeciles, degraded by miscegenation, and therefore unable to resist the advances of superior Anglo-Saxon Americans. Wow. John Sullivan, in his Manifest Destiny fame, right, said that Mexicans were not capable of imagining the concept of natural rights. His associate Caleb Cushing interpreted such as a product of their, quote, race. The first Anglo governor of California exclaimed that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races. Charles Benton, governor of New Mexico, the Mexican character is made up of stupidity, obstinacy, ignorance, duplicity, and vanity. Indiana Senator Edward Hannigan, the Hispanic and Anglo races were incompatible, and in no reasonable period should we amalgamate. And then you have people coming into California right here. As for accounts of Mexican California, Zenas Leonard, 1839, wrote of Joseph Walker and his expedition. He said that the Mexicans there were indolent and stupid Spaniards. Spaniards, okay? The people of a ferocious and wicked nature. And it just goes on and on. Let's see what he says here arrogantly. In the hands of an enterprising people, what a country this might be. Yeah, I mean, it's so indicting that I just get quiet. I mean, what do you say? You know?
I'm trying to figure out whether or not, because we had so many different people, immigrants coming to the United States with so much
Sure.
different education, did we think that we were superior because of the education throughout the world and they didn't go into Mexico and share it? I guess thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't tell you with this one though, right? Remember the depictions of Alexa de Tocqueville, who was here in America at the time, and the depiction of the historian Richard Hofstadter, who writes about it later, is they contend, right, that no, a lot of these Americans had minimal education, very
Oh,
minimal
right, yeah.
education, and
It's not like the Spaniards and the Europeans that were coming over they weren't getting it from them. Like, I guess the Americans at that time were Spaniards and Europeans.
well, I mean, like the Spaniards, right? You have when Spain had California, they only educated 3 kids, um, and Vallejo was one of them. And it was like Pedro Fages was the governor. It was like his son, and then he had a well-to-do friend who was the father of Vallejo, and then there was another well-connected kid, and they received an incredible education. I mean, equivalent to collegiate education for sure. The best of tutors from Europe, etc. But for the rest of them, right, the Native Americans arguably were getting a little bit better of an education in the missions than the average Spaniard and later Mexican was getting in Mexican California. They had no public school system. They had no private Catholic school system. And so yeah, maybe with the little education that the Americans had, maybe it was more than the average Mexican had at that time. But my goodness, you read their quotes and all that, they were almost illiterate. Their grammar and syntax were terrible, and they were filled with popular prejudices and so forth, right? And remember, if there was anyone that was intellectual, like Alexa de Tocqueville, who came here and traveled, they better not put on airs like they were better than the rest of them, than the frontiersmen, right?
Right.
Yes, by Atmosphere.
And so,
And Ant on Amazon Music.
but I said every time I say his first name, she goes off. Yeah, it's too close to her name.
Huh.
But at any rate, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, so I get almost the opposite inclination, is that the ones that had a modicum of education actually did not promote war with Mexico. Like I think of Abraham Lincoln, self-taught, right? He opposed, but of course you also have just that image of him being a very empathetic person as well. But he was vocally against this war. Henry Clay, who badly wanted to become president, took a strong stance against this war. And Henry Clay had a fine education and was very articulate. And the reformers in the 1830s and 40s that we'll get to soon. The reformers were like the abolitionists, those for the temperance movement against alcohol, against child labor, for prison reform, etc. Right? That we had a flood of reform movements in the antebellum before the war period, from the 1830s through 50s, before the Civil War. And most of the antebellum reformers, including evangelical Christians, were against this war. But a lot of these guys, right, had a very minimal education and had the popular prejudices of their time. And yeah, and I don't get it. because I especially don't get it when I see people like Dana, who had some education. No, Alexa, stop. Sorry. Alexa, stop. So at any rate, people like Richard Henry Dana, he had some education. And he also, right, when you see the depictions of the Spaniards in his book, he is impressed. Like they have a refinement about them. They have class. He writes of them like dancing the fandango and just the way they dressed and the proper way of hospitality and the way they spoke, etc. And then for them to just say, man, they're indolent, and if only an enterprising people would take California, it.
I almost feel like you have to, your course is only so long and you have to touch on so many topics that
Yeah,
in order to get all this in, you almost have to go back and go through everything again.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So what happens here, right? Basically, in a nutshell, is Mieri Teran, when he gives his report, he says something needs to be done. So what was done was the April 6th colonization law, and that stated that Mexican citizens from Mexico proper were to be repatriated up into Texas to rectify the imbalance of numbers. They were to deport. Isn't that funny? Deport Americans who, after a certain date, had immigrated into Texas, and to deport those who had long been there, who were in defiance of Mexican law and customs. So not only if they had brought in slaves illegally, but if they had refused to pay their taxes, if they had not learned Spanish and become Roman Catholic, etc. So they tried to really kind of step down on them, right? Lay down the law on this April 6th colonization law. So then what happens is the middleman, the so-called bridge, Stephen Austin, he goes down and he meets with Valentin Gomez Farias, the president. And he tells him evidently in the primary sources, you must renege on some of these stipulations or else they're going to rebel. And so Gomez Farias said that you threatened rebellion. And so he arrested. He had him arrested.
Did they have enough backing to threaten rebellion?
You know what? In a way they did. In a way they did. I say that because it's not going to take long for the army of Sam Houston within this same year of 1836 to defeat the Mexican forces.
Okay.
They had thousands of
Plenty.
thousands of volunteer soldiers. So yeah, he was in prison for 15 months, and he lets out a letter that says basically, I give up. The Mexican government is obstinate, it's stubborn, they won't give in, so do as you please. And at that time, the Warhawks were taken over up in Texas.
What's your thoughts, like, on the last two assignments? They kind of overlapped a little bit. What's your thoughts on, I guess your thoughts are what you wrote, but I more over, I guess my thoughts are about the American, like I wrote in my assignment, but I wrote it kind of ignorant because I didn't go into all the little thoughts about it, is that we, as well, not we, the United States at that time pushed so hard to be bigger and better and push past a lot of issues that probably should have been touched on just to get past to be bigger and better.
Yes. No doubt. I mean, you could take that almost to the point of conspiracy theory, you know.
That's what I actually wrote. I think in to extent, yeah.
Yeah,
That's funny.
I mean, really, because the Democrats, right? You look into the writings of someone as cunning as John C. Calhoun, and Calhoun, right? He wrote that, okay, hey, this will, if they take this, it's going to eventually be a matter of time. It's going to be annexed as a new state. We'll get 2 senators and we'll get 1 House rep for every 30,000 civilians, and they will be in our same faction. They'll be slave owning cash crop farmers. So what's good for them is good for us. What's good for us is good for them.
Yeah.
So we'll become allies in how we vote, right? And they not only said that, right, but some of them even have quotes. I'm trying to think who does, but you had quotes from some people saying how convenient it is to divert everyone's attention from the problems of the commercial and the early industrial revolution. There are a lot of people that were kind of, lost in the mix. Like I mentioned, the artisans, the skilled workers, and other demographics like that. And so this is a great chance to get their mind off of all of that and be united in a quote foreign war. Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, you could say that on several of the wars. When we get to the Spanish-American War, you have a Secretary of State who says that right under the president. Says he saw symptoms of revolution from the proletariat, and we need a good, splendid little war against Spain to get people's attention off of it. Yeah. Yeah, it's scary stuff. It really kind of is. But look what William Barrett Travis, right? So at any rate, what they did, right, is they began then the last thing that happened after the April 6th colonization law was the new Constitution of Santa Anna. And it was called the Siete Leyes, okay, the seven laws Constitution. And in it, it took away governors were now handpicked by him. He could shut down Congress at will. And he took away the power of the state legislators also in some way. And I apologize, I can't remember the specific way at this moment. But it really was uber conservative. And then also he raised property requirements to such a high extent that it disenfranchised. It took away citizenship opportunities from 80% of the people in Mexico. 80. So, but of course, though, right? According to this narrative that I'm writing, it's more in line with Chicano history. This is just the excuse they were waiting for. They were waiting for the excuse to rebel, and now they got it with Santa Anna's just crazy conservative constitution. So the governor of Zacatecas, he says he will not step down, that he's been elected by his people, and he doesn't care who the president wants to handpick as his replacement. He says the state militia is his, and it's not to be nationalized by Santa Anna, which Santa Anna said was to happen. So Santa Anna raised an army and went and crushed the Zacatecan militia and arrested the governor. But in doing so, right, he gave a warning up to the Texans that if you guys don't step down, you're next. And he sent his brother and his last, I think his name was Martin Perfecto de Cos, C-O-S. And anyway, Perfecto de Cos came ahead of the army, and he stopped at what Americans were doing is they were taking over the military force, the Presidios, and chasing the Mexican soldiers out by outnumbering them so greatly. And so they were taking their cannon and their ordnance and their muskets and all that. And so at any rate, he comes up to a Presidio that's manned by these rebels, these Anglo rebels, and he demands that they step down, and they fired their cannon at him. So he came back and told Santa Anna, and Santa Anna declared deguello, that they're all guilty of treason, and the punishment for death is death. So he's not going to take prisoners. So, there are about 205 people at the Alamo, and they got surrounded. And on March 6th, 1836, they found a gap in the wall, and they came in, and they evidently let a slave or two, a woman or two, I think in all about maybe 5. They allowed about 5 non-combatant civilians to live, and they killed everybody else.
To tell the story.
Yeah, probably. And so and then also what's not real well known that the Anglos did not forgive and forget was at Goliad, Goliad, is at Goliad, right? It was not premeditated. there's evidence of that now, but they didn't know that. Is the gentleman who was in charge promised those at Goliad, did you hear what happened to Alamo? You guys are next. We got you surrounded. Come out and you can live. And so they came out and they surrendered their arms. And Santa Anna said, you had no right to do that. And he ordered that all of them be executed. And so, yeah. So, of course, the American Southern newspapers just ran with that, the massacre at Goliad. And so at that time, Sam Houston kind of shamelessly ran. His army just kind of ran from Santa Anna's and kind of got closer to engaging in guerrilla warfare. And so then Santa Anna, to be more mobile, broke his army into three. And he won some battles, etc. But then they met up on a given night at the San Jacinto River. And when they met up, right, that night, in the early hours before dawn, Sam Houston's men attacked them. And a lot of them were literally drunk or hungover, sleeping in their tents, etc. I think Sun Tzu, right, the Art of War, I think he says that, right, that you not only hit your enemy where he's weak, but sometimes you hit him where he knows he's strong because he psychologically puts his guard down. So I think Santa Anna thought, okay, I got my three armies back together. There's no way they're going to attack me now. And that's exactly what they did at San Jacinto. So they captured him and they demanded in return for his life that he surrender Texas. And so he signed it off. And the Mexican Congress made an edict that they were going to eventually take Texas back. And they warned America, right, that if America tried to annex Texas, they would mobilize their army. And which, of course, right, is just one step away from declaring war. And this one's pretty upfront, is when I was in school, right, all they did was grade band history, and they showed us how awful James K. Polk was as the president. Just before him, John Tyler was trying to do the same thing. And then how the American military bullied them in the war, and that was it. So what I'm saying is just as simple but different is I'm saying, wait a minute, these guys are elected politicians. I blame the entire generation, not just the politicians. Okay? So what I do is I try to show evidence of the popularity of this cause. So first, right, I've already gone over this, right, elected reps and members of the press, what they had to say, people who traveled to California, what they had to say, which was very degrading about Mexican people. But then, right, let's see here. So Manifest Destiny, that extension of U.S. territory to the Pacific coast was inevitable, that the U.S. owed it to other nations to guide them to enlightenment. And that was I didn't finish the quote, but that was a quote from a book, right? So supposedly, right, they should be happy if an American Stars and Stripes come over them because they'll have more economic opportunities and more political freedom, supposedly, right?
Because we're the ultimate.
Yeah, exactly. So no, right? I do admit that Tyler, right? This guy was kicked out by his own party, by the Whigs, because he did everything as if he were a Southern Democrat. It's the only president I know of that happened to. So John Tyler gets kicked out by his own party. He's a lame duck president, and so he's like, okay, yeah, I want to petition Congress to annex Texas at this time, right? And then the time passes. They have an election, and Abraham Lincoln is with his mentor, Henry Clay, as a Whig. And remember, the Whigs were like all about Hamilton's system, right? And they were for, kind of like the Republicans that will come in their place in 1852. They were for the American dream for everybody. You ought to be remunerated or paid or rewarded for your labor. You ought to have a chance to rise up the socioeconomic ladder, whatever you're doing for a living, etc. Right? So the Whigs claim to be the progressive, urban, industrial-oriented party. And so a lot of the Whigs were against it, against this war. And not to mention, right, some for the wrong reason. Some said, no, the South is going to gain an ally in Texas, right? And we don't want them to be stronger in Congress than they already are and have allies as reps. So at any rate, Abraham Lincoln, though, said, the national clamor for Texas became almost deafening, okay, according to Lincoln. And let's see here. So they choose, the Democrats choose, right? The young and inexperienced and a very obscure, right? James Knox Polk. And he, of course, is running on the account majorly of foreign policy, of manifest destiny, and taking California in particular, okay, and Oregon. So Democratic leaders took a chance on the unknown dark horse, James K. Polk, as the party's presidential candidate. Such was their confidence in the popularity and significance of manifest destiny that they took their chances on a nationally obscure and relatively inexperienced candidate. You got to remember, right? He's running against Henry Clay, and Henry Clay was arguably the most famous American of that generation. And as you know, he ironically never became president. But I say in here, right, and it's not my idea, I got it from reading, that he largely lost this election because he was not for this war. Okay. So let's see here. He simply offered what the citizens wanted. Okay. The issue of annexation of Texas swallows up all others at present. Okay, according to Polk. It is impossible to arrest the current of the popular opinion, and any man who attempts it will be crushed by it. All right. And note that most states had dropped their property requirements for citizenship. So most poor white, most white males were citizens now.
Yeah, anybody, right?
That's right. And look at the numbers. This is crazy. 1840 and 1844 presidential elections, 80% voted, and then 78.9% voted. Like, what do we have today? Like 40-something% of citizens vote for the president?
Yeah.
So at any rate, right, it does seem like an irresistible current.
Well, we have 40% with a foolproof system to prove it. What were these numbers? How were these numbers proven?
That's true. That's true. And I couldn't tell you.
Even today,
right.
I don't believe the numbers, but
Yeah.
that's just me with the conspiracy.
No, I think you have every right to doubt that with what their ability. I mean, because really, we don't have sophisticated Gallup polls until the 20th century.
Yeah.
You know? So no, I think you have every right to doubt that.
Who knows what happened in the 500 miles it took in a horse-drawn carriage to get this information to whoever.
That's right, huh? That's so true.
Look at what happens when you have to take it across town in today's day and age.
That's right. Seriously. I know a lot of people exactly.
Off of that subject,
away.
off of that subject real quick, I just got kind of a proud little goosebump. The constitutional elections of Afghanistan. I was on the first wave, and I was actually there, and we ran the ballots for their first constitutional elections. They were in the back of my Humvee, and I have one of them I have one of them in a book over. Where the heck is my book?
That's incredible.
Yeah, in a book over here someplace. I call it my I Love Me book, all the cool stuff that I've done. Yeah, to be able to have gone through that and see that in a different country was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I bet. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. My goodness, if you don't mind my asking, roughly what year was that?
03, 04,
Okay.
5 into 05. I don't have the dates right down pat, but they used their thumb and ink to vote, and I have a picture of me at the voting ballots picking. One of my guys took a picture of me picking the box up, and
That's
everyone had their colored finger,
right.
all
That's
the whole
so cool.
population. But then, of course, that was also thought to be that it was what do you call it? Padded. Somebody got a hold of the ballots. Listen, I brought the ballots getting shot at with holes in my Humvee from the stations to the counting
Wow.
area. Nothing touched those ballots. I can, yeah.
Wow.
Did you know that their constitutional elections were comprised of many different countries' constitutions put together as their own?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, just new things that are going to be in history books.
That's right.
New
That's
things.
incredible.
Yeah.
That reminds me of like the Meiji Restoration in Japan, where they would try to take the best from every country.
Oh,
Yeah, politically and institutionally and so forth. Yeah. Yeah, believe it or not, at that time, they chose us as the top school system.
really?
Yeah. Yeah.
The-
So see here I have, it's not just the Southerners, but news reports and local political analyses suggested widespread support for annexation in Pennsylvania, New England, Indiana, Illinois, and other places in the North. So this was a very popular cause, supposedly, according to the primary sources, right? You have this. It is widely reported that gentlemen of the Mississippi delegation, as well as from Alabama and Virginia, have openly declared that they will not go for any candidate that is not for the annexation of Texas. So there was plenty of popular pressure and political pressure put upon these villains that were in DC, like James K. Polk. Now, granted, I don't mean to exonerate Polk, because long before he felt that popular pressure, he already advocated that, right? He was already, a bit, racist, pro manifest destiny, all of that. So I don't mean to exonerate him, but I'm just saying he's not the only one that we should blame. So at any rate, yeah. So on the campaign trail, Polk broadcasts in no uncertain terms his determination to remake the American map. His 1844 campaign was the most uncompromisingly expansionistic in American history, with a candidate promising that if elected, he would wrestle the entirety of the Oregon country from England, 54, 40 or fight. The Democratic slogan about Seize Oregon encapsulated his vision of an America that spanned the continent. He offered an openly pugilistic platform and evinced no hesitation about putting U.S. soldiers in harm's way in order to fulfill what he saw as the nation's destiny. And he's talking about Texas with Mexico. The greatest enthusiasm is everywhere prevailing, he boasted. So at any rate, you get the point.
I was just trying to find a map of 1854 to see where the lines were at that time.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and then this quote right here is just terrible. General Winfield Scott officially complained to Washington, D.C. regarding American war crimes against Mexicans that would make heaven weep, like raping Mexican women in the sight of tied up Mexican men.
Which happened more than we want to admit to.
Oh, yeah.
They want to. I say we. I don't have any part of that.
Me neither. Me neither. Yeah, that's beyond awful.
To say we Americans and then look back at all this that a lot of people, myself included, growing up in high school, we touched on a lot of this stuff, but our minds as young men at that time were a lot of other places than listening to the teachers, unfortunately.
For
So
sure.
to go through all of this now and to read all the when I spoke to you last about your thesis, your papers written here, it's like every sentence is so many facts that I have to go back and reread it 5 times to get everything out of each one. It's a lot of information.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I just
It's a lot of. I mean, I take away a good amount from everything, but I could read it 5 times and get more.
right. Oh, good. I hope that's good. I just honestly, I just feel like, um, I maybe I should take into account more that this is an introductory class, but I just feel like, they're paying me to share with you guys and at least the basics of what I know. I really do. It sounds cheesy, but I feel like morally compelled to share it with you guys.
You're you're right. All of your information here and the way that you break it down in these zooms
Uh-huh.
uh pushes me to want to know more. So whatever you're doing, it's right.
Oh, good.
It once you get into it and you get talking about it, it and you kind of assimilate to we start thinking about what actually happened and why we're where we are today,
Yeah.
then it becomes a pretty damn big deal.
Yeah,
It, it,
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I was gonna say it's less me than it is just the subject itself. Just the data itself is just so intriguing.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So you probably know, right, that that the technical cause of the war, right? Because I kind of just kind of fast forwarded over that. But Polk tried twice with a guy named Slidell to buy California, and Mexican Congress said no.
Yep.
And so then he issued a complaint to Congress that they had troops above the Rio Grande. They called it the Rio Bravo del Norte. Um, and um, and they said, well, we do because the border, according to the Adams-Onis Treaty with Spain, is the Nueces River, not the Rio Bravo del Norte or not the Rio Grande. And I think technically they were right,
Which
but
was north or south of the?
it's north. It's north of our river. So yeah, we're fighting for a little patch of southwestern Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and what I'd like to know is, how fertile that land is, how populated it is or has been. But of course, right under the popular narrative, it didn't matter. It didn't matter because to Polk, right, it was a pretext anyway. He was waiting for his excuse to go to war. So at any rate, he sends his men beyond the Nueces to the Rio Grande, and he sends a cavalry unit on a reconnoitering mission. And people supposedly haven't said who fired first, but they shot and they shot a handful of American soldiers, killing them off their horses. And so Polk tells Congress that American blood has been shed on American soil because they were north of the Rio Grande, and that was good enough to get Congress, both houses, to declare war. Yeah. So
Which they already had an interest in the first place.
oh, for sure. And then also, as far as showing the designs, right? You have just one person alone, Archibald Gillespie, the spy, who's in Oregon, right? And he is encouraging Fremont. You already have immediately ships that are coming into San Francisco Bay in the people of a guy named John Sloat and a guy named Robert Stockton, who both came in by ship. And then you have a
Where
guy
were
named,
they?
I'm
Where were
sorry.
they coming from?
They came from oh gosh, because at that time you didn't have the Panama Canal. I'm assuming they had to go all the way underneath. Uh,
That's what I was wondering. All the way
yeah,
around the.
all the way underneath. Is it Cape Horn?
Yeah,
Cape Horn is Africa, huh?
I think.
Yeah, it's what is it? At any rate, yeah, all the way underneath the southern end of South America, Peru
Right.
and Argentina. Yeah. So
That's a trip.
yeah. And then they sent a guy named Stephen Kearney across the Santa Fe Trail. Uh, and he went into New Mexico. And to this day, right, I would love to read about it because they just mention it in the Chicano history books. Is they kind of vilify the Chicano leaders there They said that they didn't put up any fight. And matter of fact, they made an immediate deal with Kearney, whereby they could stay in charge, keep their wealth, keep their positions, etc. But just the stars and stripes were flying over them now. And so I would love to learn more about that. And I'm sorry, I don't know. But yeah, New Mexico leaders supposedly cut a deal. And then from there, he felt safe enough to take the Old Spanish Trail into Southern California. And in Los Angeles, right, that's where they put up a fight. Kearney is going to lose before he gets help from Robert Stockton coming down into LA. And Robert Stockton didn't mess around. He put Los Angeles under martial law with a curfew, saying they'd shoot you after the curfew. And so it was highly contested in LA in that region. And not to mention also, you had a guy with an interesting name. His name was Pio Pico. And he went down into Baja as he had been a governor of Mexican California. He went down into Baja and raised an army and guns, etc., and came back up into Los Angeles and helped free them from that martial law. And then they took it over again. So it went back and forth. It was highly contested in Los Angeles and Southern California. But the Chicano historians also decry the fact that there wasn't much of a fight at all in either San Francisco or Monterey. And I don't know the details on that, but there just wasn't.
They didn't have enough they didn't have enough soldiers or militia, whatever it was, to
Probably.
moving far enough north.
Probably. And then also, right, their Comandante General, the leader of their troops, Vallejo, was taken as a hostage immediately by Ezekiel Merritt, Lucas Graham, and these other roughshod kind of mountain men type guys. They caught him having breakfast with his daughters, and supposedly he ironically said, what was it? I'm gonna mess it up, but he said, "To what do I owe the pleasure of the arrival of such distinguished gentlemen in my humble abode?" and I guess Ezekiel Merritt literally had tobacco juice dripping from his beard. And so just the irony of all that, right? This very suave, cosmopolitan Vallejo.
Yeah.
They take him as a hostage. Yeah. I know I have a nephew. My brother married a Mexican American girl, and her family's from Guadalajara, and he takes after his mom and his looks, and he would have this Bear Flag backpack they always take to school. And one day I stopped him. I said, Cade, babe, you don't, I don't think you know what you're wearing, bud. I don't think your mom's family would be happy about that Bear Flag.
Yeah, for sure.
Know? But it's funny, things go full circle. He's playing for Chivas in soccer in Guadalajara, the same city that his mom's family's from.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Crazy, huh? But at any rate, but yeah, he liked just the looks of the Bear Flag, and he had several things of the Bear Flag, and I tried to tell him, the story of it, at least the basics.
And his parents never said anything?
You know what? His mom didn't care as much as I thought she would. But I pretty much know her family would.
Yeah.
Yeah, for whatever reason, the mom was more apathetic about it than I had anticipated. So let's see here. So the same thing, you get quotes about let's see here. Let's go. Where do we have okay. So also, okay, the fighting, right? I'm just gonna do the very basics if you don't mind, or we're gonna be here forever. But the Northern Army was Zachary Taylor led in the north. His major wins in battles were Resaca de la Palma, Saltillo, Monterrey, and then Buena Vista. Buena Vista, right? Zachary Taylor was ordered by his superior, Winfield Scott, to give him over a third of his men, because Winfield Scott said that his invasion into Mexico City was more significant. and so militarily, and so he needed more men. So he deprives him of more than a third of his men, and so then Zachary Taylor decided to fight more defensively, with fewer in number, and so he had a series of 4 trenches, right? And they were back in the 4th and final trench, almost out of ammunition, and Santa Anna quit. Santa Anna quit, said that he had seen enough slaughter of his men, because as you would know better than I, when you have a well-ensconced defensive position and you have high-powered, machinery,
Weaponry.
yeah, that the person that takes the offensive is going to incur more casualties.
Yep.
So at any rate, it was sickening him seeing the casualties of his men. And so he left, not knowing how close he was to a victory at Buena Vista. Yeah. And so then in the South, right, they think that it was done symbolically and deliberately. But Winfield Scott took pretty much the exact path that Hernan Cortez had taken to get to Tenochtitlan. And people think that was on purpose, that was symbolic, right? That you got a new conqueror coming in, like a modern day Hernando Cortez. So when he came in, one battle that stands out to me, or 2 battles, is one was Cerro Gordo. They put cannon up a very, very steep and high embankment that the Mexican army never thought could have been possible. And somehow a young engineer figured it out, and overnight got him up there. And so Cerro Gordo is an example of their technological expertise and kind of edge over the Mexican army. And then another one, right, was a guy named Valencia was fighting with another gentleman, and the guy could not stand Valencia, and Valencia ran out of ammunition, and he asked that gentleman to give him more ammunition, and he refused. And so he had to surrender, and the Americans told him, hand over your ammunition. And he supposedly told them, if I had ammunition, you wouldn't be standing here. And so the Mexican army, they shot themselves in the foot in some ways, right? And not to mention, right, they had like 2 to 3 different presidents just during this 2-year war. So they're still experiencing political instability at this time. And so at any rate, the other one, right, was the Battle of Chapultepec. That was like the West Point for Mexican soldiers. And you have the famous 6 héroes, the 6 heroes. And they fought to the last man in hand-to-hand combat atop the castle of Chapultepec. And supposedly the last one draped himself in the Mexican flag and dove off to his death, rather preferring that to the Americans grabbing his flag. And so that is known by a lot of Mexican people to this day. So at any rate, and then of course, which will be no surprise to you as a military gentleman, is Winfield Scott stressed that it was more difficult to occupy Mexico City than it was to conquer Mexico City. And so he got really strict with his men. He made them go to mass. On the eyewitness of 2 people, if one of the soldiers raped a Mexican woman, he was executed in front of the other Americans and in front of the Mexican people for them to see that he was bringing about justice as well. So he really tried to keep the peace as best as he could in that awkward situation of occupying their capital. And we have evidence that he could not wait to come back home, and that he had just a sense of duty and called to go and fight. So at any rate, yeah, so you have all that going on. And so that was from 1846 to 1848. Then at the end of that, right, you had the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and that settled the boundary, with the exception of the Gadsden Purchase, right, that added a little bit at the bottom. It settled the boundary, but more importantly, it promised Mexican Americans, right, for whom, as the Chicanos say, for whom they didn't cross the border crossed them, right? It was Mexico here first. And so at any rate, for those for whom the border crossed them, they are declared citizenship and citizenship rights, particularly the right to property. But the problem is, though, right, is when in carrying it out, they gave it carrying it out to the states individually. And that was a mistake in hindsight, because for whatever reason, that populist racism and so forth reared its ugly head at the state level, more so than the federal, even more than the federal government.
Well,
So
I mean, the states were in the middle of it.
yeah, exactly.
The states, the closest, the ones that were meant to carry it out, right?
Yeah,
We're in the middle of all of this, and you're going to give them the control.
exactly.
They already have the interest, so now they have the controlling interest.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. Absolutely. And so, right, especially in Texas and in California, what do you know? They made it very difficult to prove your land ownership. They wanted latitude and longitude lines. They wanted a signature and a date. I mean, who had that, right? Also, if you had land that you were not cultivating, they would grant squatters' rights that someone came and squatted on the portion of your land, because a lot of them in California, especially, right, were pastoral. They had sheep or cattle, etc. So they weren't cultivating some crop. So just like moths eating up a garment.
Every little loophole.
Yes, exactly. These Anglos come in, right? And then to make matters worse, right, the judges were elected now because of Jacksonian democracy. And so now they got to worry about making popular decisions and appealing to now where you have suddenly a majority of gringos coming flooding into California. Because as you know, right, gold was found 8 days before the war was officially over. So right at the end of the war, they found gold. And it was popularized by the president, sent from Governor Mason to the president. Then to make matters worse, right, the president defies the Northwest Ordinance. And the Northwest Ordinance, right, like as we see when we're flying in an airplane, puts everything in 6 acre squares, 6 acre square plots, and then divides it into municipalities, into counties, into states, etc. Right, and they're supposed to put it up on public auction, or to set a price no higher than $2 an acre, and allow people to buy it. And so instead, right, he doesn't declare any of that, and he just says, go for it, go for the gold. And he defies the Northwest Ordinance. So now, right, there's no zoning, there are no city governments in some places, no county governments, no sheriff's offices and police departments. So there really is kind of some evidence for that Wild West image, that at least for a window of time. Yeah. So at any rate, that's what Turner's thesis is, right? Is he says basically, because the dangers and the opportunities in the West were uniquely indiscriminate, that it renewed American meritocracy, or it renewed American equality of economic opportunity, right? It leveled the playing field, because anybody, right, can get a disease. Anybody could die from a Native American attack on one of the overland trails. Anybody could be shot by a bandit, making it in California, etc., etc. And then also, right, everybody has access to try to squat on land and get squatters' rights to it. Everybody has rights to become an entrepreneur of any sort, like they used to, the expression mining the miners, right? Like Levi Strauss and these guys, right? You provide the Chinese were great at this. You provide some good or some service to the miners, and you don't have to mine, right? You cook and clean for them, feed them, have an inn for them to stay and sleep, etc. So you have entrepreneurial opportunities for cheap or even free squatted upon land, and oh gosh, what else does he say as an example of an opportunity that was supposedly indiscriminate? My memory's not clicking, but at any rate, you get the point, right? Is that's his thesis. So he shows evidence of a rough and wild West. He shows evidence of opportunities, business opportunities, land opportunities, etc., for virtually anybody. Yeah, excuse me. All right, now we're into opportunities. Oh, of course, mineral wealth, right? And some people devise some very creative things as far as the long toms and the sluices and the other contrivances that allowed them to get the gold. Supposedly, right? The placer placer it supposedly alludes to superficial level. So, like when they first found it, right in the American River, they cut the width of the American River in half so that it would increase the current and get the saw and grist mills moving more quickly and more powerfully, right? And they literally found the gold there in the rocks of the bed of the river. And so, if you got there soon enough, right, according to the Spanish newspapers, they were saying that people were just making out like bandits in 1848 when it was first begun. So the most famous, arguably, in gold rush historiography is The World Rushed In by J.S. Holiday. That's a classic. I also think I enjoy the writings of H.W. Brands from the University of Texas. I think he does a very thorough job and is always opinionated on everything and has like an intelligent point to make. And he's fun to read as well. So at any rate, then number 6, I say, what about discrimination? So the next two, right, are revisionist. They're challenging or refuting Turner's thesis, right? That the West renewed equality of opportunity for everybody. So, okay, if it did, then why is it that you had this horrible, horrible racism that's so obvious? And then it manifested itself not only socially in how people behaved, but also in the law. Okay. And so Americans came in, and in some cases, according to Felipe Armesto in his book, Our America, said that the Americans just extorted them. They came in with superior numbers and guns and said, get out, get off the property, or we're going to kill you right here on the spot. You had shyster lawyers who would make such high, exorbitant demands for their fees that even if they won the case, they would end up owning the plantation afterwards, right? And some things never change, huh? I hear that lawyers' fees are just incredibly high. So at any rate, you have you have all this going on with the squatters. We've already talked about that. The anti-vagrancy law, known as the Greaser Law. Now, what H.W. Brands thinks, okay, is he thinks the origin of the word greaser was the fact that Mexican Americans almost monopolized the mechanic position for the Conestoga wagons, and that oftentimes
all the way back.
I'm sorry.
All the way back to then.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what H.W. Brands thinks, and that they would roll their sleeves all the way up and barrel down, holding the wagon wheel down into a barrel full of grease, and then their arms would just be covered in it as they work the wheels on the Conestoga wagons. So at any rate, yeah. So I tend to I'd like to think that he's right because he's a pretty well-known historian. But yeah, so forcing those Hispanic landowners unable to prove in court their ownership to leave the premises. That was the anti-vagrancy law. All right. And then, oh man, this one right here. This is just another one that's just embarrassing. Between 1848 and 1928, sources cite the lynching of 597 Mexican Americans at a rate of 473 per 100,000. Yeah.
For all of those issues that we just spoke about.
Right. Right.
Vagrancy, squatting.
Yep. Yep. And with the what was I going to say also with the lynching? Oh, and also, right, there was a double standard with the bandits. Now, granted, it's not cut and dry. You had cases, right, in which vigilante groups formed up that had Latino and Anglo people on them, and you had bandit groups that had Latino and Anglo criminals. You really did. But it does nevertheless seem like when it appeared that there was a Mexican bandido who was hell bent on getting the Anglos and stealing from them and killing, etc. There was a bigger, I think, official and popular response. I think racism played into it. So the most famous, right, was Joaquin Murrieta. He's the one, right, that John Rollins Ridge wrote a biography on, and it formed the foundation for the story of Zorro. Yeah, Joaquin Murrieta. But the case with him, right? They didn't do that with, I don't know of other people, is they supposedly cut off his head and put it in a jar in the governor's mansion to show to everybody publicly when they got him. And matter of fact, there is there's an annual like commemoration of Joaquin Murrieta, if that story is true of it being him that they got right at that spot. But somewhere off the 99 freeway toward Madera is where they think he was camping, and they had a fire, and they were surprised by a sheriff and in a vigilante group, and he and others were shot and killed on the spot. So yeah, they have a commemoration for him every year. So let's see here. Then of course, right, there was resentment because some of the Mexicans beat them here. Sinaloans, right, being in northern Mexico, the Sinaloans seem to have beat the Anglo miners here. And there was resentment about that. And then the Chileans, right? The Chileans knew how to use mercury to discern between fool's gold and the real thing. And that was just one of many methods that they were familiar with in their long history of mining in Chile. And of course, what were they called? Mexicans, and out of ignorance. And there was resentment, right, that they were doing so well. So, yeah. And then at this time, you have the treatment of Asians as well was horrific. A guy named Charles Crocker is going to, this is a few years after the gold rush, right? Going into the 1860s. But Charles Crocker, he employed, I can't remember how many initially, but they were known as coolie laborers, COOLIE, right? And it was like an indentured servitude from the Hawaiian Islands and like the Philippines and Asia. And so yeah, he gets these coolie laborers, and they did such a great job that he made a bet with Durant of the Central Pacific, or he was Central Pacific, of the Union Pacific, that his Chinese laborers could lay a mile of track in a day.
I watched movies, I guess, historian, the where they looked at that. I've watched them.
Interesting. Yeah. And so they had to do the dangerous stuff. They were stigmatized as being kind of a diminutive in size. And so they would put them in reed baskets and like hang them off the sides of mountains and have them chip away and put a stick of dynamite in the side of the mountain and hope that they're pulled up in time, that they're not killed in the explosion. Yeah. Just crazy stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, so there was plenty of racism at this time that that um uh, uh Mr. Turner just conveniently ignores. Okay. And by the way, right, when they fought back in maintaining their culture. They fought back outside the system, sometimes as vigilantes, and they fought within the system. So, for instance, within the system, supposedly San Antonio, Texas, Los Angeles, California, and two or three of the cities of New Mexico had a pretty decent size middle class of Mexican Americans that were, like writers and lawyers and teachers and businessmen and bankers, etc. Okay. And yeah, matter of fact, the Santa Fe Ring, I still want to read about that. It supposedly included Anglo corporate guys and Hispanic corporate guys, and they did some shady stuff to get rich together. And it was known as the Santa Fe Ring of New Mexico. And the Gorras Blancas, right, the white hats, they did both. They went and cut fences of big corporate ranchers who unfairly won land from Hispanic people in the courts and stole back the cattle or horses, etc. And they also ran candidates for state legislator, and they had a decent number of assemblymen in New Mexico, a part of their organization. So yeah, they fought within and outside the system. And then lastly is Marxist history. Very simple, right? And that is they don't buy Turner's thesis because to them in the West, just like everywhere else, big business won out, period. Right? So one of the biggest examples they have, right, it comes down to basically two things, economic capital and political capital, right? The economic capital, they could buy the machines. According to Alan Brinkley's textbook, the majority of mineral wealth that was extracted from mountainsides and caves, etc., came from very large, expensive machines that had to go hundreds of feet in through the rock, right? You're not going to do that with a pickaxe. And so at any rate, they had the hydraulic drill by water, the pneumatic drill by air power, etc. And, these original drills were like as big as oil derricks, real big, cumbersome things and expensive. So the average guy can't afford that. When it came to harvesting, you had the mechanical reaper, thresher, and the beginnings of the harvester combine. And you just can't compete with that as far as how much acreage they could do at a given time, and they could just undersell you with their product. And then also, right, you have political capital, and that is basically connections, right? So the example of that is at Muscle Slough. At Muscle Slough, this was in Southern California. There it is right here. The Kansas and Topeka Railroad is coming in their way. But before that, squatters took that land and they started improving it, and no one was claiming it at the time. So a local judge granted it to them by squatters' rights. But then in comes the Kansas and Topeka Railroad, and they say, "Get out, guys." And they're like, "No, a local judge gave this to us." And they're like, "Oh, that's cute, but we have it from federal Congress. So get out," right? And because, as you may know, as a way of subsidizing the expensive business of railroading, because of course, right, from the time of Alexander Hamilton, they decided things like that were good for the whole country, so hence worthy of being subsidized. So for every mile of track that they laid, they would give them so much acreage on both sides of the track, and of course they'd sell it for profit, right? But they had like three categories. They had a plateau, and that got the least amount of acreage. I want to say they started out around 11 to 12 acres for each mile on each side. And then it would go up if it was a desert, right? If it was arid and dry. And then it would go up the highest if it was mountainous, right? Because you got to blast through mountainsides, etc., for your tracks and lay the grades at crazy grades, etc. But at any rate, they oftentimes just bribe the land surveyor. The land could be that flat, and it'd be on paper mountainous, and so
Yeah.
they could optimize how much land they get, and then of course they could sell the price at what they wanted, right? This land on the sides.
Sounds like modern day insurance.
Yeah, doesn't it? Seriously, huh? And so yeah, so they needless to say, granted that land from the federal government, they had rights that overpowered that of the local judge, giving that land to the squatters. So they sent a federal marshal in there and they shot him. And so then they went to a fort all the way in Arizona. The soldiers were sent to Muscle Slough to fight to fight a battle with these squatters and force them off the land. So it's just an example, right? That if you had, and then another example of that, right, is generically is water. Is if some people were getting even free land in the Homestead Act, right, of 1862, but if you have no access to water and you're trying to hit the table underneath and you don't find anything and there are no rivers, etc., a lot of people abandoned their free land because they had no water, right? And so the well-connected, of course, always managed to get what they wanted with water. And so, and it came to the point where the well-connected were the leading politicians. So, of course, you probably know of the Owens Valley and the river there being monopolized by the city of Los Angeles, and Hetch Hetchy by San Francisco.
Yep.
Yeah. So at any rate, that's what this last one says, is that they don't buy Turner's thesis that supposedly indiscriminate dangers and indiscriminate opportunities opened up opportunity for everybody. They think that the wealthy, just like anywhere else in the West, the wealthy won. All
Sounds
right.
well.
All right, boy, that was 2 hours, but I think I'm done.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Dominic. I'm going to give you more than 5 points for this one.
I appreciate it. It just so happens, my son's soccer, we usually leave and I'm usually on the drive on this. I actually got to pay attention more to the information that you're putting out here. 5 minutes before we were supposed to leave the house, canceled.
All right. I was going to say, I hope you didn't miss it.
No, it's frustrating they canceled the last minute, but it was nice to be able to sit here and finish.
Sure.
Now I got to get him to get up out of his bed so he's going to go on a run. He needs to get his butt up. Let's go, boy.
How old is your boy, if you don't mind my asking?
He's 9.
9. Okay, good. Yeah, I have an 11-year-old.
My 11-year-old girl just went. She's on a competitive soccer team.
All right.
My son's on a competitive team too. He's just a little bit younger. This one that my daughter's on, they don't stop for anything. It's called surf, and surf is worldwide.
Is it Bay Area surf?
No, she's on Valley Surf.
Oh, Valley Surf. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But they're nationally ranked and they're really freaking good.
Good.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's great, except for every weekend when you can't go camping, you go to tournaments.
I know. My nephew, oh my goodness, to get where he got, my brother and sister-in-law had no life.
No, right. Yeah, when my wife is in college going for her master's and I'm in college just trying to get something. So I appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.
Sounds good, Dominic. Thank you.
Oh, hey, I sent you a message about that. I've been told that professors don't let go of their tests for a certain reason. I was still in a rough place trying to take in all of this. I'm in a lot better place right now with the class. Is there any way that I could take a look at that test or even have a chance to redo it?
Yes, there is. What I could do is I could go back to the the properties, and I could put it as unlimited.
Okay.
Yeah, as unlimited submissions.
Okay. You said that all the information is in each one of the 5. I think it was on 5 of your thesis, right? That's That's true. That's a true fact.
That I know that literally, I think I should have a question on every single section of every single assignment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're not in any specific order. I need to go, so I just need to, okay. I'll figure it out, but I feel like I can do better than what I did.
Okay, good. All right.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
No problem, Dominic. I'm happy to do that.
I appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.